This and every episode of REKT Podcast is brought to you by Beaksy Exchange, an upcoming cryptocurrency exchange built in collaboration with One Market Data. Beaksy is bringing legacy finance speed, power, and sophistication to crypto for the first time. With 225,000 transactions per second per pair, comparable to NASDAQ, 15 order types on day one, with 25 order types on full rollout, and a dedicated customer support team, Beaksy is setting itself apart from the competition. Check out Beaksy today at Beaksy.com and pre-register today at Beaksy.com/registration to get your free Beaksy Exchange tokens. That's Beaksy.com, BEAXY.com.
This is Fluffy Pony, and you're on REKT.
Hello and welcome to REKT Podcast. I am Bunchu alongside my esteemed colleague and co-host, Crypto Chamber. Chamber, how are you today, buddy?
I am doing very well. I'm very excited. We have maybe the most anticipated guest so far in the history of REKT Podcast. So it's bright and early here in North America, but I believe it's midday where he is.
Well, yeah. you gonna introduce him now or what?
I was gonna leave that to you as the host.
We, as Chamber said, we have a very special guest today, Fluffy Pony, Riccardo Spagne. How are you?
I am excellent, thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for joining us. We are super excited to have you. Let's get right into things here. So my first question, I need to know, how did you get the nickname Fluffy Pony?
That is an excellent starting question. So I worked with these two girls at one of my first jobs, and they were known as Fluffy Puppy and Fluffy Bunny. I think those are nicknames that they gave themselves. At any rate, being in that environment and working with them ultimately led to me needing to get a nickname as well. And they decided that Fluffy Pony was the nickname that I was going to be stuck with. And when you start using that nickname in daily conversation and people don't let you live it down, eventually you're stuck with it.
That is fantastic. I can just picture, those memes that go around where it's like on St. Patrick's Day, it'll be like, here's your leprechaun name, and it's like your date of birth and your first letter of your name, and that's how you get the name. It's just like, here's your Monero name. It's just Fluffy plus the animal you have as a pet or something. So I would be Fluffy Shorky with my little Shorky shitty dogs. But Chamber, what would be your Fluffy name?
Just Fluffy. I don't take pets.
No pets?
Animals should live outside. If they wanted homes, they should build them themselves.
Wow. Okay.
Hot take.
Chamber is not supporting the ASPCA.
No.
And we are never getting sponsorship from PETA, and that's that. So, but I think we need to make that a meme. Maybe we'll work on the pet thing, and it'll just be Fluffy plus, something else. But that's pretty cool. I mean, that's kind of how I got the nickname Bunchu, randomly, and then my buddies just kept with it, and they've been calling me that for 10 years now, so it's kind of weird. But anyway, all right, so that was a good start. So we have to, I need to ask, obviously you're the face of Monero and the face of privacy in crypto, privacy coins in crypto. How did you get there? What were you doing before Monero? How did you get into this crazy crypto space?
Well, I set out to become the legs of privacy in crypto, and somehow ended up being the face of privacy in crypto along the way. Sorry, that was terrible.
We appreciate all bad jokes.
Okay.
That's basically what we do here.
Good. It's glad, I feel like I found my people. I'm not alone.
That's right.
No, this is a good
One of
crowd
us.
for you.
One of us.
There are literally dozens of us. Dozens of us.
Dozens.
No, so I got into Bitcoin in early 2011. In fact, it was around this time of the year. So this is coming up on my 8th year in crypto, which is, now that I think about it, a significantly long time. And I started, how I found out about it was I was reading Slashdot, as you used to back in the day. And there was an article about a guy, a Google engineer, who had written a Java library for Bitcoin. And I was like, well, if a Google engineer thinks that this weird currency thing is worth looking at, maybe I should look at it too. And went down the rabbit hole. There were a lot less resources then than there are now, but there was, there were also a lot less scams. So it was pretty much everything you read was true and accurate. And lots of technically rich information, because that was kind of, everything was sort of a lot harder. Everything was terrible from a UX perspective. Everything was like, here's this GitHub issue or SourceForge or whatever, and you've got to like dig through it and try and figure out what you're looking at, and how to do the thing that you want to do. And I think, like a lot of people, I found mining interesting early on. It's like, just let your computer run and get really hot, and you get a bunch of worthless coins for that, or not so worthless. And I sort of was quite interested in the technical aspect of mining. Living in South Africa, I sort of, and being an entrepreneur, of course, I was always looking for business opportunities, and I was like, wow, these coins are worth something, and maybe I can do like a more professional sort of full-scale mining operation. And I started sketching that out and figuring out what it would look like. But electricity prices in South Africa at the time were better than they are now, but still not really competitive compared to other countries, especially in Europe and sort of Asia. One of the big challenges as well, though, is cooling rather. South Africa's weather just naturally is a lot warmer than many other places. We don't get snow in winter. So, like a wet, coldish winter would not be too bad. But then when the temperatures are hitting like 40 degrees Celsius in summer, cooling that farm is going to be painful. So I spent a little while playing around with that idea, and then eventually decided like that wasn't really going to work for me. So maybe what I should do is look at being the guy who sells spades to miners, or sells pickaxes to miners. Like, there's all this like peripheral ecosystem stuff. So dabbled in writing some tools to help miners. Spent a lot of time trying to figure out like what drivers you should be using if you're GPU mining. Played around with pre-ordered Butterfly Labs ASICs, got burnt on that. I did get some of my jalapenos eventually, and they were like basically worthless by the time they arrived. So fun times, early ASIC mining fun times. I did a little bit of like wind sort of or air cooled designs, and like wind, sort of having like a wind tunnel type of design where you mount everything inside that, and learnt a lot, which was of course fascinating, and ultimately ended up designing and selling a flat packed stackable open air frame for GPU miners. That was like 2013, and that did really well. Shipping from South Africa was a pain. Had a lot of people very upset, complaining on Bitcoin Talk because their stuff took 3 months to arrive. People who chose the more expensive courier option, they were happy it arrived in like a week. And that sort of ended up or exposed me to the world of altcoins in a much larger way. I mean, previously I'd sort of dabbled, but GPU mining in 2013 was all altcoins. and people would want to buy my frames, but they would then go, okay, can we pay you in Feathercoin? And I would go like, no, you can't. You can pay me with PayPal or Bitcoin. Those are your options. And people wanted to like get rid of their old coins because they're miners. That's what they're mining. And there was no shapeshift, so like they'd have to go to an exchange to like exchange it for Bitcoin, and that's a pain. And that sort of led to me trying to or figuring out trying to figure out ways of creating an ecosystem or some sort of payment system around why should the merchant care what the person's paying with, which is led to one of the businesses I have, which is Globy, which is a payment gateway. So anyway, I'm sort of heavily involved with altcoins and by virtue of the mining thing. And early 2014, someone says to me on RC, have you heard of this Bitcoin thing? And I'm like, yeah, of course I've heard of Bitcoin. Everyone's heard of Bitcoin. It's that little, whatever it is, Dogecoin fork or whatever, something that no one cared about. And he's like, no, there's another Bitcoin that is on Bitcoin that someone's just found on Bitcoin Talk. And I'm like, oh, link me to the thread. And he linked me to the thread, and there was this whole Bitcoin discovery fake scam thing going on. But out of the gem that came out of that was this CryptoNote white paper, and coupled with the CryptoNote reference implementation, which was a brand new code base, wasn't based on Bitcoin. And I was like, wow, this is really interesting. It's privacy preserving. It's got some really interesting ideas. And the privacy stuff really jumped out at me because I'd done a lot of thinking about privacy enhancements. I'd played around with a non-coin, which was an early attempt at it. And I'd given a lot of thought to privacy enhancing systems in general, but I couldn't really figure out clever tricks to apply it to a cryptocurrency, except for the obvious, which is slap Tor on top of it. And so now suddenly there was this thing that I looked at and I was like, wow, this is really amazing, because it's the first time that I've ever seen this sort of privacy enhancing technology applied to a cryptocurrency in a way that makes sense to me. I knew of Zero Cash and Zero Coin, which at the time were theory, but this was practical. This was there was a working code base. It made sense, and it wasn't based on Bitcoin. So that was kind of how I ended up getting involved with that whole part of that whole world. Then Monero was launched by a guy called Thankful for Today. It was launched as Monero, which is a dumb name because Monero means coin in Esperanto. So Monero literally means Bitcoin. Things you discover later on. And when Thankful for Today turned out to not be a particularly benevolent dictator, when he ended up being kind of hostile to the community, then the community forked the project away from him. And one of the first things we did was name our alternate implementation Monero instead of Monero. And that sort of, we went from there, and I guess because I like talking, I ended up becoming the face of Monero.
That's funny. So, how did that happen? It just, the community kind of said, hey, you're the guy, or how does that come to be?
So, open source projects, especially when they're in the infancy, are really interesting. There's no real leaders. Everyone just sort of does things because things need to be done. So it's like, guys, we need a website. Okay, cool. So someone went and registered monero.cc, and then it was like, well, we need to put something on there. And so myself and this other guy, David Latapi, put some information together and shoved it on the website just so that there was something there. And then we needed a GitHub account registered, and so then Taco Time went and registered a GitHub account, and like there was all this practical stuff that needed to happen, and so everyone's just chipping in and doing it. And then like over time, because I had a lot of free time and could devote a lot of time to it, I ended up taking on a lot of responsibility that other people couldn't, due to lack of time, lack of resources, lack of whatever. And so because of that, I became like the de facto loudest voice, just because I had time and could devote it to this, not for any other reason. And it's like that in a lot of open source projects, especially at the beginning. It's not the guy with the most money or the guy with the prettiest face or the guy, even necessarily the guy with the best coding skills. It's really the guys with the most amount of time are the ones that become the most useful to taking that project from its infantile, very useless state to a state where it's actually useful and has a much larger community and is actually able to push the envelope.
That's super interesting. Chamber, do you have enough free time to become the face of anything?
Well, you know what? I think I do. I was also going to say, I'd have to imagine there's probably not a lot of, extrovert people in this space too. So obviously you being, like you said, very talkative, very, kind of a little bit more outgoing than most. I think that's a natural fit for you. Would that make sense?
Yeah, I think you're definitely quite accurate with that. And I think also the other thing that I noticed is, I value my privacy, but I'm able to compartmentalize, and I go sort of like, well, this is my privacy, this is the stuff that happens in my house, this is my private life, but then everything else I'm happy to sort of like expose to the public, because I have become kind of accustomed to that from business and from having to deal with obviously on a very different scale and in a very different way. I've had to deal with like business publicity, whether it is talking at a conference or going to a client meeting and having to deal with like all of that conversation. And so this was just much of the same, but in a different way. And in fact, I enjoyed this a lot more because it was like, a lot of those early public conversations, we had no idea what we were talking about. There were, parts of the way that Monero worked that we were still figuring out. And so there was this massive learning experience whilst you're doing the whole like talking to people about it and getting their input and really just building up your knowledge and like just soaking up everything that everyone says like a sponge.
Yeah, that's crazy. So without getting too technically in the weeds, so for those who may not know, how does Monero work from a privacy perspective?
Cool, good question. So the easiest way to explain this is to consider 5 aspects of privacy. And you can take these 5 aspects and you can take a look at any privacy enhancing financial system and say, or so-called privacy enhancing, and say, does it have all 5 of these? And Monero has all 5 of these to a greater or a lesser degree. So the first is hiding where transactions go to. So in Bitcoin, when you pay someone, you send money to their address, and when you go look at a block explorer, you can see that money went to that address and you can see the exact amount. So on Monero, we use something called dual key stealth addressing, and what that does is it hides the address that it's going to. So whilst I need your address to pay you, once I've made that payment, anyone who looks in the block explorer will not be able to figure out what address I've paid, even if they know the exact transaction and the exact output in the transaction that they're looking at. They will just see this seemingly random destination. The second aspect is hiding transaction values. So, again, with Bitcoin, you can see the value of each amount that's being paid. And with Monero, you can't. And the reason is because Monero uses something called ring CT. And the CT there stands for confidential transactions. It's based on Greg Maxwell's confidential transactions. And it uses something called a commitment instead of the actual amount, a cryptographic commitment. And there's some clever cryptographic tricks that are done to make sure that there are no coins created out of thin air, because you're no longer using amounts. So we have to make sure that there's still no new coins being created, except obviously the block reward. And then the third thing is hiding where transactions are coming from. So in Monero, we use something called ring signatures. And this is, I would say, probably the weakest aspect of Monero's privacy, because it is such a hard part or such a hard part to get right. So basically, the way ring signatures work is, when you're creating a transaction in Monero, you're spending money from an old transaction, from a transaction that you previously received the money in. And in Bitcoin, there's like this direct link to that old transaction. In Monero, what happens is your transaction appears to be spending a number of old transactions on the blockchain, including the actual one that you're spending. There could be 17 of those or 18 of those, however many. There's a sort of fixed set size that we use. The thing that makes it difficult, and the thing that makes it the weakest part of Monero's privacy, is that it choosing which transactions to include in this old transaction set that you're sort of creating your transaction from is genuinely difficult, because people, and we've learned this over time by actually analyzing Monero's usage patterns, or cryptocurrencies usage patterns in general. People tend to receive money and spend it quite quickly, and only very occasionally do they spend money that they received 6 months or a year or 2 years ago. So you need to account for both, and you need to weight that output selection quite heavily in the favor of newer transactions, and like have only one or two older transactions in the mix, so that everything sort of becomes a lot more obscured. It's not perfect. We've improved it over time, rapidly, and with a lot more knowledge now than we had at the beginning. This was, we sort of figured out quite early on, within the first 12 months of working on Monero, that this was going to be a problem, and that's why we spent so much time and energy improving this. And there are further improvements that the Monero Research Lab have ideas for that will make it even better. But at this point in time, that's sort of that transaction graph traceability aspect of Monero is relatively, compared to the rest of Monero's privacy enhancing aspects, it's relatively weaker. It's still very, very strong, and it still would take a monumental amount of metadata to be able to try and break that. But it's important to understand that Monero is not perfect, and this is one of the areas that requires more work and more improvement. Anyway, so that's the third aspect. The fourth aspect is hiding the IP address that transactions originate from. So Monero allows you to broadcast transactions over Tor or over I2P. And one of the projects that we're working on at the moment is to eventually bake this into the protocol in a way that it won't require any effort from the user, and all transactions will be broadcast over hidden services, but blocks will still be broadcast over normal internet, so that your full nodes and so on aren't at risk of things like isolation attacks, but you're still able to have that disconnect between a transaction and the IP address that first broadcast it. Practically attacking this is very difficult, so it's honestly not the most important aspect of any privacy enhancing financial system, but it's important to at least have the option there. And then the last aspect is maximizing the privacy set. And the way you do this in a privacy enhancing financial system is by having it the default. So everyone has to use the privacy, and if you want to opt out of the privacy, that's fine, because only a handful of people will ever opt out, and they'll only opt out in specific situations, and normally they only opt out to a small set of parties. So, for example, you might opt out of privacy because you need to be audited, and so you opt out of privacy as respects your auditor, but you don't opt out of privacy globally or in a way that compromises the privacy of anyone else. So those five are really the five key privacy enhancing aspects: hiding where transactions are going to, where they're coming from, what the amount is, what the first broadcast IP address is, and then maximizing the privacy set by making it the default.
Chamber, you got all that?
Yeah, he's going through these five requirements, and it really makes you think how insane the challenges of keeping something private in this day and age. You know what I mean? Like it's really insane. I'm like, how do you keep stuff private today? And apparently, you need at least five of those requirements. So it's blowing my mind right now that you're able to do so, and B, just how big that challenge actually is.
Yeah,
I think it's funny too that when we think about privacy, we just automatically think about, not giving our information, right? But then we go ahead and use credit cards, where they're probably the least private thing that we have, and we use them every day, all the time, and it's giving, or like your phone number, you give it out like it's nothing, but it's one of the most important pieces of information that you have about yourself. And
we used to put all of those in a book and hand those books out to crazy people, once a year.
Yeah.
Now we do the same thing, but we call it Facebook.
That's right.
Exactly. But so, I mean, I think that's a really good point. So, nothing we do is private. And so when you think about what it really takes to make something private, it's pretty... it
didn't really register with me until he started going through all of those. I'm like, oh, shit, this is serious. I'm like, it's very difficult to make things private.
Yeah. My next question, and I guess we're kind of talking about it already, is why is that so important? Especially, in crypto. Why is privacy such a important thing in your opinion, Riccardo?
So I think we live in a world where we have just completely sacrificed all hope of privacy merely so we can carry on playing Farmville, and it's actually insane to think. That's
so sad.
I know it is. When you read George Orwell's 1984, it's look at the oppressive state, and the state is so bad. The government's put cameras in everyone's house, and and there's listening devices everywhere, and they're processing all this information, and it's yeah, man, that would be a crazy world to live in, wouldn't it? Except now what we do is we have Alexa and HomePod, and we stick them in our house, and then we're surprised that someone is processing all that information. So
we sit down every Thursday and watch a show called Big Brother.
Yeah, exactly. The crazy thing is we live in an Orwellian state, in an Orwellian society. The difference is we've invited it into our home. We put all our lives on Instagram and Facebook. We broadcast our lives on Snapchat and Vine and YouTube and all of these things. We put our location on our phones, and we let Google handle that. And then we just invite all this stuff in, because you know why? Because we get convenience. And the convenience is apparently the ultimate thing, and we're quite happy to just forego everything else, as long as we can go, hey Alexa, please play a Dr. Dre song. I mean, because we're too lazy to pull out our phone and type in the song that we want to play, and we're just willing to have a device that's always listening. So we have just completely compromised our privacy, and now we're starting to wake up. Slowly, but now we're starting to wake up, and you can see it. You can see it in things like Apple making privacy a defining, distinguishing part of their device lineup. That is amazing, because it means that people will eventually start choosing that product because it preserves their privacy. And I think that the realization that people are starting to come to slowly is that we've just compromised our own privacy, and now it's time to take it back.
So I think you mentioned a good point there. It's you trade off privacy for convenience, and so how do you see something like Monero or crypto in general helping to bridge that gap?
So I think that crypto in general, or Bitcoin in particular, as the crypto that everyone knows more than anything else, I think that it's an amazing thing, because the self-sovereignty that it gives people is the first step to reclaiming your data. It can't really be yours when everyone has access to it, and it can't really be your finances when everyone has access to it. So the fact that with Bitcoin, sure, there's privacy issues, but the fact that it's yours and no one can take it from you without coming to your house and beating you over the head with a hammer. And even then, by the way, like with multi-sig and having some extra parties involved, even then they might not be able to take your money away from you. The fact that self-sovereignty is available is the first step. The fact that once you get that self-sovereignty, there are ways of enhancing your privacy with Bitcoin even, is an integral part of the future that I hope we will have, where we've reclaimed some of our privacy.
Yeah, that's super interesting. I think the more and more people that start to realize that, the more, kind of adoption we'll get. I think it's kind of the big struggle is that sometimes crypto is not easy to use. So you talk about sometimes it's the furthest thing from convenience, you know what I mean? But
absolutely.
I think that's the gap that, we got to bridge, and then everybody can wake up, you know what I mean?
Yeah, and I think that's, like, I can tell you, just based on things that I've observed in the crypto space over the past 8 years, people that got into crypto for entirely selfish reasons, like, hey, I'm here to make money, I'm here to get rich, they have picked up good habits with regards to data sanity, with regards to privacy, just by being exposed to all of this. You take people that are just like, they're traders. All they care about is trading. They have no ideological bent here. They just want to go on Binance and BitMEX and short this and long that and do TA and say it's in downward facing dog position on the chart and do all of this. Like, they are the first ones to pull their profit off the exchange so that it's not at risk. They are the first ones to go and set up like 30 different wallets in VMs so that they're able to have those coins in a way that it's truly theirs and not at risk. And yeah, some of them take like ridiculous amounts of risk, but like they get burnt once and then they learn their lesson, and it's like that level of like data sanity and owning your own keys and learning about like where you're getting poked at from a privacy perspective because you don't want your money stolen is a lesson that I wish more people would learn. And the fact that they're in there entirely for self-serving profit reasons, but they're learning the good habits, it sort of warms my heart that at least it's getting out there.
Yeah, for sure. Okay, I have a couple questions here from some of our listeners that you might be able to answer for us. So one here is, what's the best comparison, in your words, between something like Ryo currency and other kryptonite algo coins and Monero in regards to their privacy and algorithm differences?
So I think that there are a lot of forks of Monero, and there are a lot of forks, or there are a lot of CryptoNote-based currencies. CryptoNote is largely sort of dead in the water. It has been for many years. So pretty much anything that's building off CryptoNote now is doing so off Monero, or off Monero's code base. And to be honest, I think it's the same as like Bitcoin forks. They're all mostly half a dozen of one, 6 of the other. The difference between one particular fork of Bitcoin and another particular fork of Bitcoin isn't the features really. The features are not a distinguishing factor. It's really just the liquidity that's available and the number of users that are actually using it, which is the ecosystem size. And so with Monero, the liquidity that's available is key, because that means that there's more liquidity available for moving in and out of Monero, and also it's easier to sort of get lost in the crowd when you have a large user base that's a lot more liquid than others. There's no point in saying, oh, we want to get lost in the crowd, but the crowd is like 200 people. The crowd needs to be thousands and thousands and thousands of people. So I think that I'm sure that there are people that can speak more to the particular differences between Monero and Aeon, or the particular differences between Monero and Italocoin and all these other projects. But honestly, I don't think that it makes any difference whatsoever. The key factor is how big is the crowd that you want to get lost in.
That's an interesting point, yeah, especially about liquidity, right? You get in some of these other coins and you need to sell it or whatever, and there's no one to sell to, and then you can't keep the same, what you thought you were getting rid of is not worth the same amount as it was 2 minutes ago. So I think that's a really important point. Next question here was, what are your thoughts on KYC and the thought that, it'll be everywhere all over exchanges soon, when we talk about privacy? Do you see that being the case? Do you think what do you think about that whole aspect?
Yeah, look, I mean, I think that there's a subset of crypto people, of the community, and of people building products who eschew KYC, and they want to build systems that get around that. And I think that those systems are not going away. If you look at systems like BISC and some of the other decentralized exchange projects, they are never going to have KYC, and there's no way to build. I mean, why would you build KYC into it? It's unnecessary. I do think that we're going to get to a point where hopefully people become very accustomed to privacy enhancing systems being a way of life. And I'd like to just make it clear that I am not against policing in general, or law enforcement. I'm not against at all the surveillance of somebody where there is an actual indication that the person is committing a crime. I have no problem with that sort of active surveillance. The issue that I have is with passive surveillance. So KYC in its current form is a form of passive surveillance. It basically takes the onus from law enforcement agencies, who would otherwise go and have confidential informants, and they would go and do actual police work, actual detective work, to go and figure out when people are committing crimes. Instead, it takes all of the responsibility off their shoulders and it puts it on financial institutions, who now need to do KYC, AML, reporting this, reporting that, reporting the other, and it's created this system where all these financial agencies, whether it's your bank or your broker or the company you're buying a car from or leasing a car from, everyone now is on edge, and they're just looking out for like anything that could be going wrong, anywhere where they might need to go and take action, because you might possibly be a terrorist who is buying a car, and they need to stop that. It's not the police that need to stop that, it's the bank that needs to stop that, which is crazy. And so it's led to this entire perverse system where everyone's just like on edge all the time, and they're playing policemen when it's not their job to be policemen. Their job is to be a good bank or a good credit broker or a good whatever financial provider. not to be a bank who's also a policeman.
Yeah, I think that's a really great point. Because you're right, there's no need for the passive part of it, and I think people will hopefully see that at some point. One other question here, and then I'll get into something else. I did want to ask you about Tari project, and if you could tell us kind of what that is, where it came from, and what are the goals there.
Sure. So Tari is trying to be a decentralized assets protocol. And so I'm one of the co-founders of Tari Labs, which is one of the biggest contributors, or is the biggest contributor to the Tari protocol. And the idea is that digital assets can and should be really useful, but that none of the protocols that we've seen thus far for digital assets have really been scalable, secure, and extensible enough for like true consumer needs. So digital assets, what we think of as digital assets, are things that are natively digital assets. So things like loyalty points, in-game assets, in-game tokens, security tokens, tickets. What else? You could use tokens for a bunch of things that are natively digital, like DRM. And at the moment, there's sort of like the scattershot approach to a lot of these systems. So you've got Ethereum, for example, which I think is arguably the largest digital assets platform in the world. And Ethereum is just horrible from a scaling perspective. It has no built-in privacy, and it has a bunch of other issues of its own. And so it's not really designed for that. It's designed for, it's designed to boil the ocean, which I don't think is a good approach to anything, but it's not really designed for digital assets. It can do digital assets, but it tends to do so in a very chunky way. So we're sort of saying, like, what if instead of trying to do the boil the ocean approach that Ethereum took, what if we just focused on digital assets and built a system that can do that in a way that is incredibly secure, incredibly extensible, and highly scalable? And that's really what Tari is trying to become.
Interesting. So I'm looking at Tari right now on the website, and there's a couple cool differences here. One of it comes with the mining, and I see something about merge mining. Can you explain that?
Sure. So one of the issues at the moment, of course, is with securing a protocol. And we've seen lots of different ideas, from things like PBFT, which is practical Byzantine fault tolerance, to like EOS that has 21 people who get on a phone call every Monday and decide what transactions they're going to allow that week, to proof of work, which is the classic Bitcoin and Monero way of coming to consensus, to proof of stake, which has its own issues, which I am not convinced are surmountable. The issue with proof of work that a lot of people raise is, oh yes, but it consumes a lot of electricity, which is true.
Yep.
And the energy is literally being used to secure the chain, so that's good. But now you can imagine with something like digital assets, it would be crazy if like each digital asset provider went and spun up a whole new blockchain and got a bunch of people to mine it. That would be ludicrous. In fact, if you take it one step further, anyone building a new protocol really should be trying to avoid, if at all possible, creating a new proof of work based protocol and just adding more miners into the mix, because that just seems at least a little bit irresponsible. So we looked at this.
When you say that, you mean from a securing the network perspective, because the more miners, the more secure the network is, correct?
Yes, but I mean, in other words, there's a limited amount of, if we kept creating new proof of work chains all the time, and then eventually more and more people were mining them, because like all of them are trying to be profitable, and so then the pool of available miners grows, then you're just burning more and more electricity. And I think that there's like an upper bound for the amount of electricity that we need to burn in order to keep all of the proof of work chains secure. Both Bitcoin, Monero, and so on. And that's where stuff like merge mining becomes really useful, because the way merge mining works is, and it's been done for things like Dogecoin and Namecoin and a couple of others. The way it works is miners that are already mining Monero will be able to mine Tari as well with almost no extra effort. It's not going to burn more electricity. There's a tiny little bit of extra effort that the mining pool needs to take, but the actual miners won't notice a difference. And they will be rewarded with their normal Monero block reward and transaction fees, and then they'll be rewarded with an additional Tari block reward and transaction fees because of the merge mining of it. And what this does from Tari's perspective is it will secure Tari's chain by binding it to Monero's chain. And it creates very little overhead. There are not a lot of problems that with the system. It's been in use and play for coins like Namecoin for many, many years. It provides all of the security that Monero has for the Tari chain upfront, without anyone needing to go and canvas a brand new set of miners, and it doesn't burn any more electricity than Monero is already creating. So from that perspective, it's like a win-win-win, and that's one of the reasons why Tari is going to be merge mined with Monero. We get all of Monero's security. Miners get an extra block reward, which means that they're able to be more profitable, faster, and for longer, and everyone wins.
That's super interesting, especially from the electricity perspective, because that is, one of the big, criticisms of mining and all of that kind of stuff. So I think that's a really awesome point that you made, and not something I really had thought of before. So that's pretty interesting. Chamber, any questions here before I move on to the stuff that you really want to talk about?
No, I'm okay. I those tree hugging hippies I'll go to hell.
Oh, geez.
Let's burn some energy.
And bridges while you're at it.
That's right. Yeah. So we got PETA, and then what? Like I feel like those are like kind of the same
they're
group.
Like the same people.
Yeah.
You just.
I'm doubling down on them right now.
That's it. All right, Fluffy Pony. So I'm going to read you a tweet. This is what Chamber really wants to talk about, because Chamber is kind of like our resident Twitter gossip guy. So this is a tweet you put out, I guess, a couple days ago to Calvin Ayre. Hey, Calvin Ayre, is it possible to get a 4-for-1 deal on those lawsuits so the whole Magical Crypto team can get sued together? That way we can sync up our lawsuit timing. So, Chamber, you want to dive into this?
Yeah, so I woke up a couple of days ago and was very confused on Twitter. I thought a bunch of cats were following me with astronaut helmets on. But it turns out people have been getting some letters in the mail. We've been seeing it more and more over the last couple of days. But yeah, Calvin Ayre has been sending out some correspondence via their lawyers, like cease and desist letters. It's been pretty insane. I know you've been a little vocal on it. I know there's been talk of like legal help for, is it I want to get the name right, the Hodlnaut, yeah, the astronaut cat. So yeah, do you want to talk a little bit about that?
Sure. I mean, it's to anyone that hasn't been following, the whole thing really comes down to there's this guy, Craig Wright, who says that he is Satoshi Nakamoto, the guy who created Bitcoin. To that end, I mean, you would expect someone who makes such a bold claim to provide proof, and then we could all go, oh wow, he really is, and off we go to the races. And to date, he hasn't provided any public proof. He has claimed to have provided proof privately to some people, which, I mean, like that. What does that even mean? It's like I can provide proof that I'm the King of England to people privately. Like it's unless it's public. How is anyone supposed to accept that? It's like I'm the King of England, and you can trust me. You can also trust my best friend Jim and my uncle Bob, because I've proved it to them. I mean, it's meaningless. So
extravagant claims. You need extravagant evidence.
Absolutely. You can't make a claim that is that large and then go like, well, I'm not providing evidence. But that's exactly what he's done, and it's super frustrating because, like, I'm happy with two scenarios. I'm happy with never knowing who Satoshi is or was. I'm also happy with finding out who Satoshi is or was, as long as it's accompanied by actual proof. This weird in between, where it's like, hi, I'm Satoshi, but I refuse to prove it to you, it's not only frustrating and infuriating, but it's like why? What are you out to do? And making grandiose claims like that is normally accompanied by some sort of scheme, and I don't know what the scheme is or what the plan is, but I mean, it feels like a con. It really feels like a con. I feel like an expert con artist is trying to take me for a ride. And so I've been very vocal about the fact that until such time as there's actual public evidence, I'm of the opinion that Craig Wright is a fraud. And there are a lot of people that agree with me. And so now Craig has shacked up with this guy, Calvin Ayre, who is, I don't know, he made a bunch of money from online gambling or running online poker stuff or whatever he does. And now Calvin is basically footing the bill for them to go and sue people who say that Craig Wright is a fraud. and I don't know what the end game is here, because I mean, if the end game is to get a bunch of people to go to court, what's the point? And if the end game is to try and frighten people into complying with the letter's demands, and the letter says that you have to publicly apologize and acknowledge that Craig is Satoshi, I mean, Can
I read the apology? So
please do.
I'm actually reading Peter McCormick's letter he had posted on Twitter the other day. So at the very end, the apology that needs to be made to Dr. Craig Wright has to sound like this. I was wrong to allege Craig Wright fraudulently claimed to be Satoshi. I accept he is Satoshi. I am sorry, Dr. Wright. I will not repeat this libel. Isn't that great? What a crazy letter to receive. This is something fantastic here. But yeah, I don't know what the end game is. I would imagine with Calvin Ayre, a couple of weeks ago, he was getting some heat on Twitter for some imagery. So I'm assuming he's like, well, I'll just take my money and let's change the narrative and really talk about Craig Wright being Satoshi.
But by the way, speaking of Peter, did you see that picture he posted where he was wearing the Craig Wright as a fraud shirt, and then how he always has the Ian Bellina picture? Mm-hmm. In the background of that picture, I don't know if you noticed, it's the Calvin Ayre picture.
So my favorite part of the whole Peter thing was when I read the letter that he received. The first thing I noticed was the handwriting for the lawyer.
His signature.
And I'm like, am I the only one that noticed that? So I'm glad that I'm not the only one that noticed his childlike signature.
It's real bad.
It's very bad. And so Peter, in his reply back, basically mirrored the signature with his name, and it's now the background on his Twitter page. So I think that's terrific.
So, but I think maybe, I don't know how this would actually work if he does, take people to court, but in a fraud or libel suit, isn't I guess the burden of proof is on the accusers, correct? And I mean, as far as I know, and I am not a lawyer, but the burden of proof would be on the...
You're not a lawyer?
I'm not. Oh. I am not. I am also not a astronaut skeleton or a astronaut cat. So, like, the burden of proof, I feel like, would be on the accusers and not the accused. So maybe his whole end game is to, take people to court and basically have somebody say it's not up to him to prove he is. It's you can't say he's not. So that could be a end around way for him to not have to provide any proof, which would be interesting and kind of genius on his part, I guess. But I don't know. The whole thing's fucked.
Here's the problem with that. It could be. You're absolutely right. And dependent on the jurisdiction. In some jurisdictions, the person saying he's a fraud would have to prove the validity of that statement. In other jurisdictions, he'd have to prove he's Satoshi Nakamoto first. So, I mean, it's entirely jurisdictional. But I think that the big thing here is, regardless, I can, for example, go to court and I can provide proof that he's a fraud merely by showing some of the stuff that he's already done. Like where he's falsified signatures. Falsifying a cryptographic signature, like, that is a fraudulent action. It doesn't matter whether he's Satoshi Nakamoto or not. That is a fraudulent action. And so am I calling him a fraud and saying that he's not Satoshi Nakamoto because of his fraudulent actions, I think is an entirely reasonable conclusion to make.
I would agree. Chamber, I keep thinking back to when we had Lisa on. So, Riccardo, Lisa Edwards, we had her on to talk about, she's writing a movie, all that kind of stuff, and she is actually Craig Wright's sister. So we obviously asked her the question of, do you think your brother is Satoshi? Chamber, how would you kind of describe her response?
Wow, it's family.
When you think back about it
it's
now.
Family, but she gave the most politically correct answer you could for him being your brother. It didn't feel
like she was even convinced.
Yeah, she was definitely on the fence, I would say, at best, and that's his sister.
So that was interesting, but anyway, so that's the latest Craig Wright Satoshi Twitter gossip that I know Chamber was chomping at the bit.
Yeah, no, that was great. And shout out to the rest of the magical crypto team. That's Whale Panda, Satoshi Light, and I always thought it was Excellion, but is it Excel Lion?
No, it is Excellion, but it's because it's got lion in the name.
All right, I just wanted to make
character. No, don't worry, it is Excellion.
So talk about what you guys are doing all together there with the magical crypto.
Sure.
Crew.
So we've got a conference coming up next month in New York called Magical Crypto Conference. We're really excited about it. The speaker lineup is insane. I'm just like blown away by the number of speakers that sent us an application for when we put out the call for speakers. And we really struggled to choose speakers, and I mean there were some that we approached as well, and we had this just like fantastic combination of speakers, and like there are a bunch that we had to say no to, and like really good world-class speakers, and I'm it's so frustrating. It's like if we'd known that we were going to get this sort of response, we would have had like a 3-day conference. So the speaker lineup is phenomenal, and the speaking slots are short. It's not these like 45-minute long speaking slots. It's short 15-minute talks, and then longer panels. It's 15 minutes I think is plenty of time for someone to speak about something interesting, and for the audience to still have rapt attention. It's going to be quite a fast-paced conference where we'll move through things pretty quickly. There's 2 tracks. There's a more technical track, and then a track that is slightly less technical. It's we've got topics ranging from how to create more Bitcoin core developers, through to how to use cryptocurrencies without the internet, through to obviously privacy topics and all sorts of things in between. There's also a vendor area where there'll be booths and people actually selling stuff at booths. So it's not like, like here's just a bunch of informative booths with booth babes that don't know anything about the product. That's super frustrating. So we've tried to encourage people that have booths to either sell something or to demo something. I hate vendor areas because it's literally just like a bunch of vendors with large TV panels at the back, showing their products off, and that's so frustrating. I go there so that I can either buy stuff or that they can tell me about their product and show it to me in the flesh. We're trying to make it just more interesting and a lot more fun. We have a bunch of cool chill out areas as well, also because we realize I know from personal experience that when I'm at a conference the whole day, I want to sit and sometimes talk to people, and it's very frustrating when there's no way to do that, and you end up having to sit on the floor next to the elevators.
Yeah, that's what are the dates of this?
May 11th and 12th.
Yeah, so that's coming up pretty soon. I'm just looking at the speaker list now, and it's crazy. Elizabeth Stark from Lightning Labs, Adam Back from Blockstream. You got Meltem Demures and Jill Carlson, who, shout out to their podcast. They're it's a pretty awesome podcast that they're doing, the What Grinds My Gears. Just Jimmy Song, tons of Jameson Lopp. Man, you guys are loaded. You guys are loaded, so that's pretty cool. So that'll be fun. So check it out if you're in New York, May 11th and 12th. All right, so we're going to end it with some fun here. We obviously like to be relevant and topical, so as you may know, Game of Thrones kicked off last night for its final season. Everybody's talking about it, and so we want to see who you think your magical crypto friends would be if they were Game of Thrones characters. So I guess let's start with yourself. Who would you be in the Game of Thrones universe?
That's a tough one. I kind of think that I could pull off Jon Snow.
Oh, 100%.
Wow.
That's what I was thinking.
Yeah, all right. So we're gonna get right out the gate with Jon Snow. Who would Charlie Lee be?
Oh, that's a tough one. Charlie Lee. Charlie Lee could probably pull off Arya Stark, I think, pretty well. But the male version.
The chicken has no name.
Yeah. And then who else? And then Whale Panda, Theon Greyjoy.
Oh, that's a good one.
I think that would work out well. And then obviously Exelion has to be Joffrey.
Wow, there you go. I think those are awesome casting choices. So that's it. We just wanted to have a little fun with something relevant there towards the end. So that's going to do it for all the things that we have. We want to make sure we give you just a couple seconds here to kind of let people know where they can find you, anything else that you're working on that we might not have talked about, anything like that. The floor is yours.
Cool. So yeah, I'm Fluffy Pony on Twitter. If you want to attend Magical Crypto Conference, then at magicalcryptoconference.com, tickets are on sale. And we try to keep the ticket prices as accessible and as low as we possibly can, given that it's New York. And then, Tari is at tari.com. Tari is being written in Rust. So if you want to learn to program in Rust, then there's a project you can work on. Monero is at getmonero.org. Monero is written in C++. So if you want to learn C++, there's a project you can work on. And then Globy is at globy.com, like globe with an E.com. And Globy lets you, as a merchant, accept a wide variety of cryptocurrencies and not really care about how people are paying you. Those are sort of the main projects that I'm involved in and the things that I'm most excited about.
Awesome. Well, again, we appreciate your time. Chamber, anything else you want to add before we get going?
No, just make sure to check out our cool merch on the new and improved website with our merch section, and check out Patreon. Support us there if you can.
Awesome. And Fluffy Pony, thank you so much. Again, we enjoyed having you. We hope you had some fun with us this morning. And other than that, until next time, don't get wrecked, and that is financial advice.